questions we wrestle with as Christians about who God is, how do we live out our faith, what is the Bible, what is the truth of the Bible, what are we supposed to believe, how are we supposed to live. There are really big, deep questions that we ask each other, that we ask God, that we wrestle with ourselves. And that's why the Cultivate podcast exists, to help us go deeper in our understanding of who God is, His Word, and the way that He's called us to live. Hey everyone, welcome back. We are starting a new series today. At the time that we are recording these, we are doing I keep calling it SummerSlam, which is the name of a WrestleMania event.
Didn't know that.
It's like summer seminar.
Yes.
Where we are having some teachers come in and do some different topics, talk about some things. And we had the idea of maybe making those into podcast episodes so they'll be a little more evergreen and we can kind of have them in this format, which is cool. So I spoke the first night.
They give you the most heavy hitting.
I know, and those weren't easy topiks. And handle 3 of them in one night. You have an hour and a half to go. And
do the hardest questions in Christianity.
Right. It was fun. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
You're the pastor. You should
expect. That's right. You get paid.
Expect those pitches.
So we are going to spend some time over the next several episodes kind of putting that content into podcast format. And so we decided the best format to do this was to invite expert podcast producer, expert question asker, and all around awesome young woman. Abigail Ben. Young woman, that's right.
Thank you.
I'm old.
Thank you.
I'm old, you're young.
That's right. Different generations.
No, you could have disagreed if you wanted to.
I do disagree. Well, it does confuse me because those who don't know, Charlie has daughters that span quite the age range, and so it's forever confused me what age you actually are. I would get it wrong 100% of the time.
Old enough to be your dad.
Well, maybe. 52, I feel like you're way too young.
52 minus 29 is 23.
Okay, I guess my parents had me when they were older.
There you go. You're the youngest. You could be our oldest.
Youngest kids are always the best kids.
Oh, you and Layla can start a club.
She'll agree with me.
Oh, absolutely, she will. All right, so I'm just going to hand it over to you.
All right. So before we kick off these summer seminars, I like SummerSlam better.
Yeah.
Before we kick off the SummerSlam series, I want to get us into kind of a frame of mind. You've talked to me about this a bunch of times. I could toss you a question and you would just know what I was asking. Where do we put these topics within our personal view of our faith? Like how heavy, how important, how much weight do we give to these types of topics? Because I feel like there is sometimes the tendency, whether you're far along in your faith or really new in your faith, that you can get to this roadblock of a question.
Right.
And you give more weight to it than maybe it really needs. But some people can hinge some really pivotal beliefs in their faith based on these big questions. And so it kind of helps me to figure out, like, where does this land in the grand scheme of what my faith is? How much importance should I give it? And then where, should it stop me in my tracks? Should it keep me from believing or having doubt? Should it, so you've kind of positioned it as a house metaphor.
Right. And so you got a house, you're trying to build your own spiritual house. And the first thing you have to decide is, and where am I going to build the house?
Right.
And so we want to build our houses in Christian dirt, right? So what makes someone a Christian? Where I place my house, I consider the soil, like the location of that house. Those are the things that are absolutely essential. If you believe them, you're a Christian. If you don't believe them, you are not a Christian. And typically kind of summarize that in the simple to say, very complex theological statement: Jesus died for our sins.
Right.
Like that's what you need to believe.
Right.
But even in that, who is Jesus? Mm-hmm. What is sin? And what does it mean that he died? And what does his death have to do with sin? Like,
right.
So there's more to it. Sounds like it's just a few words, but it's pretty deep. And so now I got to build my house, and the foundation of my house are kind of the key theological principles that if you get them wrong, you can still be building a house as a Christian, but a very, very unstable house.
Right.
And for things like that, I mean, like the authority of the scripture, the knowledge of who God is as far as like the Trinity, the dual nature of Jesus, those sorts of things that, man, if you get those things wrong, your house is going to collapse.
Right. And to back up from that just even a little bit to make sure people are clear, if you didn't build your house in the Christian neighborhood, that means you're following a different religion.
Right.
You're like completely out of the context of
you're a Mormon, you're an atheist, you are a Buddhist, you are a Hindu.
Okay.
And again, you might think that it's a Christian soul, but I don't really believe that Jesus Christ died for my sins.
Right.
I believe that Jesus was just a dude.
Right.
Like a Jehovah's Witness would.
Right.
Or is the first of two born sons of God with devil as his brother. And
ooh, I've never heard that.
That's Mormon talk.
Whoa.
Reference a previous set of podcasts that Scott Sutton and I did to hear some of that stuff. Right. So you think it's Christian adjacent in some senses, but you don't really believe in who Jesus really is, or you don't understand the significance of his death. But in order to be a Christian, right, you have to understand that. And then on top of that, you put your foundational principles that if you don't have stability here, you can still have a house, but it will be unstable very quickly.
Right.
Now you build up the framing of your house, which I consider kind of your important issues that I would say this is where Christians agree to disagree, but they're significant enough where you need to have really thought about it.
Right.
And one of the main ones I use is the second blessing of the Spirit.
Okay.
That charismatics believe there's a second blessing of the Holy Spirit and that its primary manifestation is seen in speaking in tongues.
Okay. I
don't believe that. Our church doesn't believe that, but I'm not trying to fight an Assembly of God pastor over it.
Yeah.
And it is a significant, important kind of load-bearing wall in their house.
Right.
And
it informs things that you do. Right.
And it's significant to us. It's significant to them. But again, I'm not saying they're in the wrong neighborhood or their house is going to collapse.
Right.
And then beyond that, I would say are the decorative things in your house, which when we get a few episodes down the road, we come back again and you're going to ask me questions about the talk that I'm going to give on the book of Revelation. I mean, that to me, that's all.
What is like
that's
nice
all
chandelier?
That's all decoration.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And so you put all those things together and that kind of informs what is my theological house.
Right.
Now, the topics that we covered Monday night for the first episode of SummerSlam, original sin, God sending people to hell, and can we change God's mind?
Right.
I would say the third one is probably more decorative. The changing God's mind. It's a really interesting thing to think about, and it can be really, really mind expanding. But I don't think that where you come to that is going to have any great significance to your theological house.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the first two, about original sin and does God send people to hell? Why does God send people to hell? Which is the exact framing of the question. The interesting thing about the two of those kind of also illustrates why it is hard to delineate between things that are soil, foundation, structure, because one implies the other.
Right.
Okay, if Jesus died for sins, and that means this, then that means this, and that means this, and that means this. Well, do I have to believe this? Well, I mean, it's not foundational, but it's true if this is true, if this is true, if this is true, if this is true.
Right.
And since we know this is true, then
we kind of build that way.
Then we build that way. And so it's like so where do these things fall? Ultimately, I would say if they're kind of one-off implications, then I probably would put them like in the important, kind of in the house. Like some of these, I would say at least kind of the way that we're going to talk about it, I would say these are load-bearing, they're load-bearing walls.
Okay.
They are significant enough. They're not just like, oh man, everybody's kind of got their own opinion about it, because they really are rooted both in what I believe is fairly clear teaching in Scripture. They're very closely connected to the character of God.
Right.
And really are one-off, maybe two-off implications of what the phrase Jesus died for sin means.
Right.
And so
who God is.
They're not make or break, but unhealthy thinking on either of those first two issues lead to problems.
They're kind of like the pipe that if you don't get it checked out.
The what?
The pipe in your house, like there's a leak or something.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
And then later on it explodes, and you're like, "Whoa!"
Right.
I mean, it started with these few questions.
You got a drip in the
right.
in the water pipes behind the wall, and left untreated, it's either going to explode or there's going to be mold in your house.
Right.
Yeah, I mean and to me you can come to different conclusions, I suppose. But really how you get there and how you're thinking about God and how you're thinking about the gospel that gets you there, I think is of incredible importance.
Yeah, absolutely.
But some of these questions, the reason I wouldn't put them as foundational or as part of kind of the dirt, right? The essential truths, is that they're questions that some people don't even think about. But once your brain kind of gets there, the conclusion you come to, I think, reflects
who you think Jesus is or who.
Right.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Which is funny because whenever you first told me about these questions, all three of them, I'd never asked. And I'm known as the question asker for this podcast.
Right.
And I've never asked any of these questions, whether they were just implied to me or my brain had just never gotten there at a certain point.
In my defense, I did not come up with these questions.
Right.
They were handed to me. Apparently, they were birthed out of some significant questions that came out of some of our women's Bible studies.
Yes. So these are authentic to our audience and what people are actually discussing.
And people who were not able to be there at SummerSlam.
Right.
Are asking where can I listen to it, and it's right now.
They're
listening to it right now.
This is it. Welcome. All right. Well, let's hop into the first one. You tackled the massive question of should I believe in original sin? Right. Is that the way the question was phrased?
Should I or do I need to? Is it
essential for me to believe in this concept?
Right.
So break down first what some people may hear that and be like, well, what even is original sin?
Right. And at its simplest, I think the best way to describe it is when you are born,
right,
before you have committed any sin, are you by your very nature damaged in some way?
Right.
Not because of anything that you have done, but because a nature, propensity, if you will,
right,
for sin was passed down to you because of the original sin of Adam.
Right.
And so the use of the usage of that phrase in the question is not how I would frame it, because do I have to believe in original sin? No. That phrase didn't even really come about until much later, centuries after Paul wrote. And so it's really less about that, the doctrine of original sin. I mean, that's a title that we gave to it. The question that I would say, which I think is the same question, but I think is just a little more, I don't know, palatable is the right word. Are we by our very nature sinners?
Are we inherently bad?
Are we inherently sinners? Bad and good is really bad. And it's important to me. This is a load-bearing wall in the house, right?
Okay.
The use of good and bad versus right and wrong. Almost all of the discussions in Scripture about sin are about righteous and unrighteous,
right,
which are legal terms. Mm-hmm. Are you guilty or not guilty?
Right.
Good and bad is a relative term.
Okay.
I can be better than you. Mm-hmm. You can be worse than me, but we could both be bad.
Sure.
On a scale of what?
Of other people. Okay.
Compared to other people, compared on some scale somewhere. God doesn't rank people on a good bad scale.
Right.
There's guilty and not guilty.
Okay.
So are we born not bad but guilty?
Okay. So this is not necessarily just asking the question of are we born with bad behaviors or like annoyances, whatever? Are we born into a position of being guilty?
Right. Are we born guilty? And then of course then by implication, because we are born guilty, we also will have a natural propensity towards doing evil, but a propensity towards sin.
Okay.
And so the question, the way the phrase, are we born guilty or are we born innocent?
Right.
And innocent in, I would say, two senses of that word. Innocent in whatever the kind of in the opposite of guilty, but also innocent in It's not that I'm good or bad. I
didn't know.
I don't even.
Well, it's interesting because you phrase those way. Am I born guilty? Am I born innocent? And I say yes.
Right.
My natural inclination is yes.
Yeah.
How do you suss that out?
It's a complex question.
Right.
It's a complex question. And half joking, maybe not, maybe 2% joking.
Okay.
I said this at SummerSlam and I say it again here. The idea of whether or not we are born with a propensity towards evil, towards sin. Like, I don't know how you can spend much time around little babies.
Oh.
And not think, oh, wow, ooh, there's something there. Even the cutest ones.
I have many of them, but the newest.
Your niece included, that is your namesake.
Namesake, Abigail Maeve.
Right. She's cute as she could be. Put her on the Gerber baby jar. And I've not been around her enough to know the answer to this question, but I also don't need to ask. I'm sure she's got some stuff where there just seems to be a natural inclination in babies towards selfishness, towards anger, and
destruction.
Yeah. and that, doesn't make me mad at a baby.
No.
But there seems it seems to functionally be true.
Right.
I mean, the thing that you could say, I guess, is now they are born innocent, but you don't have to be in this world very long before you realize anger and selfishness are the rules. So you're born innocent and very quickly choose sin.
Right.
Right.
Well, and also, I don't know how much this plays a role in this question or this thought process, but do people question that the world you're coming into is broken? Like, sometimes you could be asking the question, why is my kid born with X, Y, and Z, with these struggles? They didn't choose that, obviously.
Right.
The mom didn't do anything. The dad didn't do anything. But they're born into a broken world that does have disease and horrors that they're born into. Yeah,
so again, that's why the phrasing of the question is important. Do I believe in original sin? Do I believe that there was an original sin?
Right.
Yes, I believe that. That Adam and Eve ate the apple, and that was the original sin. And I think everyone should believe that there are massive generations-long implications of that.
Right.
You see that in the nature of the curses that God gives. Talks about the enmity and the battle that there's going to be between people and the snake. That battle of good and evil that is going to exist. We're experiencing that work is going to move from work to toil.
Right.
That the earth itself seems like it's going to be fighting back against us, which we experience some of that the world is cursed, that is going to be broken. Childbearing is going to be a problem. There's going to be problems, authority battles between men and women.
That never happens.
Yeah. all of these things are generational. Not, specifically things that happened to Adam and Eve, right? They lost their innocence. They started to experience shame. There was disturbance in their relationship with God. All of those things were specific to that moment, seem to have carried on. But in the curses, there are clear descriptions of what's going to happen to the world and and the kind of interactions that we're going to have that I feel like we have all experienced.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And so we understand that there was an original sin, and that original sin has consequences for as long as this earth exists.
Right.
So that is clearly true. The question, though, is also through that, does that mean
I am
every child that then is born has a measure of guilt attached to that? So it wasn't just that Adam and Eve were declared guilty in that moment. People were declared guilty in that moment.
Right.
And so you were, by your very nature and by your very birth now, because you are a person, because you are Adam was your representative. He was your great grandfather. However you think about it, he did this, and it has implications for everyone.
Right.
Or, hey, no, the punishment to Adam was specific to Adam, and any punishment that we receive is specific to us, except for just the general off-balanced curse nature of the world.
Yeah. So these two questions may answer themselves together in one, but whenever someone is asking that question, there's obviously some type of fear behind it, or there's other questions behind it that's making them want to know, do you have to believe in this or not?
Right.
So kind of break down what did Adam and Eve do, what did they disturb when they entered this? If you believe in original sin and they committed this original sin, what was the fallout that they were causing other than just God's curses? Was it detaching them from God? Was it them ruining the original order or the way we were supposed to live? And what do you think people are fearing whenever if this is true for my kid, now I have to deal with this, or now I have to consider this? Like what fear is coming in behind these things?
So we both know people who have gone through like 12-step programs,
right?
Have gone through recovery. And I had two really good friends when I lived in Central Arkansas, and they both kind of led different ministries that were involved in recovery. And one was the more traditional one, the Celebrate Recovery AA kind of deal, where it was kind of essential to say, no matter how many years sober you've been, I am an alcoholic.
Right.
Present tense.
Right.
And then the other guy was very anti that. I was an addict.
Right.
But I don't use that drug anymore. Clearly, I am not addicted. And I do not want to think of my nature as being the nature of an addict.
Right.
I believe that Jesus can heal beyond that, right? And so am I or am I not an alcoholic? I think there is an emotional, spiritual attachment that some people have to that either way, right? It was really, really important to both of them, the perspective they have. It wasn't semantics to them.
Right.
It was deeply important to them that I recognize this is by nature who I am, but I'm overcoming it every day.
Right.
No. God not only healed my addiction, but he healed who I am. I am now no longer an addict. It was deeply to them. So the question is, am I a sinner?
Right.
Not have I committed sin?
Right.
But am I a sinner?
So it's an identity question.
So have you ever lied, Abigail?
Yes.
Are you a liar? Depends on the definition.
Right.
Depends on the definition.
Right.
Depends on the definition. I certainly do not want to characterize myself as a liar.
Right.
Even though I am one who lies. I don't know if frequently is the right word, but it's not somewhere between frequently and rarely.
Right.
Right. It's something, and so am I a sinner? Is that how God views me, views us? We are sinners. My baby, who has done nothing wrong per se, is a sinner. I think that there's something difficult. People don't like that idea. It doesn't feel right to them. I don't want that to be part of my identity. I don't think that's how God views me. He views me as his son. He views me as his daughter.
Right.
If I am anything, I am loved. I'm not a sinner. Or other people be like, no, I mean, it's like I am by my nature a sinner and a sinful person. It's important for me to keep that in my mind, even though my characteristic I would say also, I am redeemed, I am forgiven, I'm adopted child of God. And so I think that there are some emotional, psychological barriers one way or the other because, and again, it probably depends on how you've heard other people talk about it. And it just, sometimes we don't like things because the wrong people say them really loudly.
Right. Yeah.
But I think we all struggle with these kind of certain identity issues, and I could get way off by talking about that. But I think that probably is the core objection. Or then, and I've had a couple of conversations since then about this. If a baby is born guilty, what happens to a baby that dies before he receives Jesus? What are the implications of that if a baby is guilty before they have even done anything and certainly have any opportunity to
have any autonomy or
right
thoughts
to do anything about it by receiving Jesus.
Right.
And I don't necessarily want this moment to get distracted by the do babies go to heaven question. I do believe that they do, and I can make that case a different time.
Right.
But I think that there's kind of next level kind of implications. But I think they're mostly surround this. It's difficult because of we think about babies, and just the idea of that God would view us
in that way
harshly.
Right. And that kind of brings to mind two thoughts of that's if you're starting to think about the do babies go to heaven, that kind of brings us to the next level of the question is who do we believe God to be? Is he actually merciful while seeing us as sinners? But then also it seems to me with a little bit of hope of that question of at the bottom of it, they're wanting to know where they stand with God. It's not just, I don't want to be called a sinner and nothing else. It's like, well, I don't want to know that I'm at odds with God because of who I naturally am. And so if someone chose to not believe in original sin and not believe in that concept, where does that leave them when it comes to the rest of the foundational issues? Is the cross important anymore? Is who God's character?
And this is the thing that I said on Monday night was Romans 6:23 for all have sinned. Romans 3:23 all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God.
Right.
Romans 6:23 for the wages of sin is death, and the free gift of God is eternal life. Right. So I think at a minimum, as long as we understand whether or not I was born a sinner, I know that I am someone who has sinned.
Right.
And I need that sin forgiven. And that sin needs to be forgiven and can only be forgiven through the death of Jesus Christ.
Right.
Whether or not, so some people may live their whole life and never ask the question, was I born this way? Was I born a sinner? Was I born condemned? It may just never occur to them. It just may have never come up. So that's why it's not in the dirt. If it were essential to being a Christian, it would come up in your very first conversation when someone's talking to you about how to receive Jesus.
Right.
And if it was foundational, then all churches and pastors would be talking about it all the time.
Right.
The way that we talk about other things. It is, once your brain gets there, I think it is an important spiritual exercise, and it does help you solidify what I do mean by the phrase Jesus died for sins. What do I mean by sin? And I think it is important too, because it helps us come to a real reckoning of who we are, who we were. And the more, again, I think we'll get back to the previous question. Why do people not like this? The more and more I think about how sinful I was and how corrupt my nature is, that can either lead me to, and again, this is the, am I an alcoholic or not debate, right? Is this going to make me feel worse about myself? Or is it going to make me feel better about the grace of God?
That's where I feel like for me, since you've talked on Monday night, the thoughts that I've had around it feels very negative to be called someone who's a product of original sin. But then I think of Romans, where it talks about the description of Jesus being the one who died once for all men. And I could be totally wrong in this, but it seems like Jesus is the opposite of Adam.
Right.
That he covered what Adam messed up. And if you remove the idea of original sin, then that description kind of falls apart.
Right. So let's look at the passage real quick, because I think it's important. And in Romans chapter 5, and we'll start in verse 6, where he's kind of explaining the gospel. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, some might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So far, he's already described us as powerless, ungodly, and sinners. Keep going, verse 9. Since we now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? So again, now he's enemies. deserving of God's wrath. Very, very strong language from Paul about the nature of our relationship. And so you could think, well, again, that's just based on what we've done, not on any inherent character corruption.
Right.
But even still, there are very definitive words being described. I mean, no one wants to think of themselves as God's enemy.
Right.
But that is what Paul is saying, that those of us apart from Jesus, that is our status. I am God's enemy. I am in opposition to God. I am his enemy.
Right.
And that's big. That's significant. And I think we have to, again, whether or not we think that we've been corrupted by original sin or not, we need to at least get over the fact, like we were in a desperate situation.
Absolutely.
Paul could not be using stronger language to describe, right? Verse 12, therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned.
Right.
This is kind of the defining verse on this topic. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned. So let's follow the logic of that. Sin entered the world through one man. Check mark.
Adam.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Eats the apple.
Sin
entered the world through one man.
Okay.
And through that, death.
Yes.
He ate the apple, sin comes into the world, and death is a consequence of that.
Right.
All agree to that. And in this way, death came to everyone, which again is hard to argue.
Mm-hmm.
That because of this, not only were Adam and Eve going to die, now everyone was Trolls World Tour, Born to Die.
Sure.
No,
my nieces and nephews love it. I just don't know the names of it.
It's Kelly Clark. This is Kelly Clarkson country song that's in the middle of it. That is, in fact, epic. Born to Die.
Okay.
I can sing a little for you later. That in this, it's not just that he's going to die, but now we're all going to die. Not based on our own sin, but on what he did. He brought death into the world, and now it's covers everybody, which is hard to argue.
Number one killer.
Then he says, because all sinned.
Right.
Past tense. Not all have sinned, but all sinned. Because we were all represented by Adam in that moment.
Right.
We were all there with him in some way.
Yeah.
Some would say that we were all represented there in him physically because
I know what you're saying.
Right. And you'll see this. It is called the seminal view of original sin.
Okay.
That is how it is passed down. So we were all there with Adam,
right,
stored in his manhood.
Sure. And
that it is passed that way.
Mm-hmm. And
so that is a complex, I would put that in the interesting part
Seems
of the
theological
part of it, right? And so is it because we were all present there, or was he just kind of more representative? The seminal view versus the representative view. He represented all of us. And either way, according to Romans 5:12, it seems that we were all found guilty of sin at that point. And verse 15, but the gift, talking about Jesus, is not like the trespass. For if the many died by the trespass of the one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? Nor can the gift of God be compared with the result of one man's sin. The judgment followed one sin and brought condemnation, but the gift followed many trespasses and brought justification. For if by the trespass of the one man death reigned through that one man, how much more will those who receive God's abundant provision of grace and the gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ? And here we are again. Consequently, just as one trespass resulted in condemnation for all people, so also one righteous act resulted in justification and life for all people. For through the disobedience of the one man, the many were made sinners.
Right.
Okay. And there's a little more, some people consider this a little bit more straightforward in Ephesians 2, verse 3. All of us lived among them, talking about sin, at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath.
Right.
And so the question then to me, the question really is, what are the implications of that for the way that I view me, I view us, and I view God? I think
like
one
that's
of
the big question.
One of the things that I think is of incredible importance, and this is back to maybe the earlier question, why do we object to this so much? If I'm going to do the time, I want it to be as I did the crime.
Right.
We think of we live in a very, very individualistic culture.
Right.
I'm responsible for me. Good things happen to me because of what I did. Bad things happen to me because of what I did. It is unfair for me to be punished for something that someone else did.
Right.
We don't think of ourselves as a community.
Yeah.
Like we are doing this. We live in a very, in a two-party system. There's us and them.
Mm-hmm.
And God it's a one-party system.
Yeah.
There's just us.
Yeah.
And there are countless examples of this in the Old Testament where one person's sin brought condemnation to the whole community.
Right.
And God, and there's specifically would say, God was upset with the Israelites because they had committed sin against him when it was just one dude and no one else even knew about it.
And that's polar opposite of our community now.
That's not the way that we think.
There's no way that anything corrupts it, my neighbor or my whole church, or, we just don't think of those.
We don't think of it in those terms, but apparently God does.
Right.
With humanity as a whole, with Israel as a whole, with the church as a whole. And so it's like when Christians get mad at something awful that happens in some other church, it's like, well, I'm glad that's not us. I'm like, sorry, bro. It is us. Right. You don't get to distance yourself from any of the bad actors that are involved in Christianity.
Right.
That's us.
And you don't get to, this makes me think of whenever I was a kid and I would get so mad at my mom for some random thing that our family was doing. And she's like, sorry, that's just, you're born as a boon.
Come on.
That's just what it is. That's how boons do things. And I'm so sorry you were born into this family. But that means you just have to accept the consequences. But I think going the step further in the, am I born a sinner? Go one step further of, well, how does God treat sinners? And what does he do throughout the whole entire Bible and throughout the whole history of humanity? How does he pursue sinners? He doesn't just turn away from them.
Right.
Being born a sinner doesn't put this massive, it does have a condemnation to it, but also the creator of the world that you have sinned against has done an all-out assault at trying to come back to you and redeem that relationship.
And that's the whole context in which Paul brings up Romans 5.
Right.
That is not a teaching on original sin. That is a teaching about the vast, overwhelming love and sacrifice of Jesus Christ, that he would die for people in this state and that his one death would pass to everyone if they would just accept it.
Right.
And it is a passage on the vastness of the love of God through Jesus.
Yeah. That
in order to make that point, he has to make sure we understand how bad the situation was. You think that you're only in the hole to God 100 when it's in fact 10 trillion.
Yeah. Right.
And he states very, very strongly, hey, it's not just 100, it's 1,000, it's 1,000,000, it's 1,000,000,000, right? He just keeps going and going, not to make you feel bad about yourself, but to make you feel good about Jesus. 100%. And so however it is that you feel about this and whatever nuance you might take on the implications of all of these things, do not allow it to put you in a pit.
Right.
Or to make you feel like that gives you some platform on which you can spread condemnation out in the world.
Right.
Don't allow it to make you feel terrible about yourself or the world. Allow it to be a realistic picture of what our state was like before Jesus and how powerful and beautiful the death and resurrection of Jesus is for us.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that wraps us up for this
That's
one.
good. That's good. In my mind, I was like, we'll just make that a wrap-up statement.
I like it.
See if we get there.
It's good.
Yep.
All right.
Abigail, thanks as always.
Of course.
And as always, thanks to you guys for joining us, and encourage you to come back and join us next time on the Cultivate Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Cultivate Podcast. Our hope is that you are taking steps to go deeper in your faith, that you are asking big questions and you're looking for answers. We hope that we can be a resource for you through our podcast and any other way that we can help you. You can find all our episodes anywhere that you can find podcasts, including YouTube. And we would love for you to go there and check out and listen to any of the other episodes that you feel that it can encourage you or help you in your faith. If you are local, we would love to help you get connected at our church. You can find us at thegrovechurch.org. If you go to the Connect link, you can find all the information you need about our services in person or online. We would love to connect with you on a Sunday or online. Any way that we can help you, pray for you, please let us know. And again, thank you so much for joining us.